Now I'm going to get to today's meeting and why we're all here. And thank you all for joining us on Zoom, and thank you all for coming here in person. Before I introduce our panel, I want to just talk about why we're doing this. As we begin our program today, I want to highlight first what PVPUSD Superintendent Alex Cheris said in his September 5th Monday message. He said that pre-pandemic English and math test scores have improved due to implementing the Jumpstart programs, free after-school tutoring, intervention classes, and the amazing teachers aligning their instruction. He also said that PVPUSD enrollment is up. While it's been fluctuating, it's at the same level as 2001. And I wanted to make sure that people understand this because there's been a lot of negative stuff that has come up at some of the forums and on social media, and I just wanted to start with some good news. In addition, Friday, PVP High School Principal Brent Kuykendall, who was going to be here but he had a schedule conflict, he tweeted that Peninsula High School was recognized by the U.S. Department of Education's 2022 National Blue Ribbon Award. That the high school won it for exemplary high-performing schools. So they're one of 297 schools across the country that got chosen, and only one of 29 here in California. So it's a great honor. So our schools have done wonderful things to prevail during the pandemic, but they've also faced a number of challenges. PVPUSD has 4 board member openings in the November election. There has already been one candidates forum sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. And as you heard earlier, there will be another candidates forum here October 6th that will be sponsored by Legal Women Voters. That one will be on Zoom. This afternoon, our panel is composed of 2 of those candidates, plus a counselor and a PTA president. Our discussion will address the issues facing the schools. I have a number of questions for the panelists, and I will also take questions from the audience, both here in person or via Zoom as time permits. So let's get our panelists up here. So we have 4 panelists, and we have, so in no specific order, we have Ami Gandhi. She's PVPUSD board member. And she's running for re-election for the 1 2-year seat. She has 1 opponent. Then we have Sara Deen. She's a PVPUSD board candidate. She's running for one of the 3 4-year seats, and she has 6 opponents. Then we have Kelly Baranick. She's Peninsula High School head counselor. And also is on the PD Faculty Association's bargaining committee. So we were supposed to have the head rep of the PDFA, but he has had a schedule conflict, so it's really fortunate that we have Kelly filling both roles here today. And we also have LaRae Bechmann. She's Ridgecrest PTA president. And she's didn't want to be the PTA president. Beth Meyerhoff had a schedule conflict. She's the state PTA president, and she helped us come up with some of the questions for today. And but we are very happy to have LaRae represented today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
All right. So to start, I gave just a brief introduction of these fine people, and I would like them to take a minute or 2 to introduce why, what they think about the schools and what they're doing in the school system right now. So we'll go left to right.
Okay. Like they mentioned, my name is Kelly Duffy Baranick. Duffy being my maiden name, grew up here, born and raised in Rancho Palos Verdes, grew up through these schools, went to Peninsula High School, graduated in '96, and then went off to play soccer in college, then Penn State, then got my master's at LMU, and I can tell you, no, college did not give me any challenges in compared to Peninsula High School. I was very well prepared. So part of the reason why I'm back, and ever since graduating with my master's in '03, I landed a job at Peninsula High School as this 24-year-old kid that the students adored and the parents were not so sure of. But now entering my 20th school year, this has become, it's never been a job for me. It's kind of my lifestyle, I always say to my husband. If I go to Pavilions for milk and I'm gone for an hour, it means I ran into parent, student, somebody. That's why I love living in our community. We all kind of take care of each other. So I'm just here to answer any questions. I have a lot of passion about mental health and just helping students in general. And I've seen a lot just growing up here and being here for 20 years. That everyone that knows me knows I have very strong opinions and not afraid to share them, but also feel that I'm very receptive to what we can all do to work together to help our children. So thank you for inviting me.
So I'll start by saying there's no shortage of opinions here either. My name is LaRae Mardesic Bechmann. I grew up on the east side of Palos Verdes and moved here about 10 years ago to start elementary school. I am currently the president of the PTSA at Ridgecrest. My professional background was in fundraising, and it's relevant as we continue to talk. Just that experience will speak to the bond initiative. I'm currently a realtor in the area. I'm a lean-in parent, meaning I've been very involved with the district and asked lots of important questions, some of which have gone unanswered. And I've talked to lots of parents about their experience here in the district, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And I did think that we had other PTSA members that would better represent the council, but I too am happy to be here today. And I'll add this. I think what makes my presentation or being here today unique is that I'm not employed by the district and I'm not running for office. So you can ask me anything you like. And with that, I yield to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Ami. I'm one of the current PVPUSD board members. I'm also a mother of two in the district, so I have a daughter who is entering 3rd grade this year, and I have a son who just started 5th grade. Somebody had asked me earlier to share a little bit about myself before I started on the board. So before I was appointed to the board, I worked in corporate America for 17 years. So I bring a business background to this position. And just like you, I also I have a passion about mental health. And so I worked in the mental health division of the pharmaceutical company. And the passion for mental health really has to do with the fact that, with most illnesses, patients go to see their doctor and they can easily get a diagnosis. But sometimes with mental health, the diagnosis can be hidden for years and years. So it's a really important field to be in. When anybody asks me what I'm most passionate about and why I wanted to be on the school board, I always talk about just loving this community so much that I've been a part of for 5 years now, and really wanting to be involved in the education for our children. However, recently a friend of mine said, dig deeper. I want to know more. What is it about you that makes you so passionate? So I really spent a little bit of time digging deeper. And what I came to was, when I was little growing up, my dad was a special education teacher. And he taught independent living skills to adults with developmental disabilities. And every day he'd come home and he'd be extremely tired, and he would sit down on the couch, and I'd be like, Dad, how was your day? And he would say, it was great. I made a difference today. And that's where my love for education came from. And that is what prompted me to go and interview to be appointed to the board. Thank you so much.
So my name is Sara, Deen, and I am running for one of the four-year seats on the Palos Verdes Peninsula Unified School District Board. It's a mouthful. I've been a resident in the district since 2014 now, but I was born and raised in California. I went to college at UC Berkeley, dental school at UCSF. I did my residency at UCLA, and I've lived in a few other states in the middle and realized I really love California. So I'm a mom of two kids. I have a 9th grader at PV High, and I have an 8th grader that is still not in-person schooling. My 8th grader is still doing distance learning because we have fallen into some of the gaps that were mentioned previously. So while our family is super grateful, we love this school district. I mean, we have awesome opportunities, but there are some gaps when it comes to accessing some of the learning support services. I think there's room to improve on mental health as well. So we hope that my 8th grader returns to in-person schooling next year. But so initially, I was practicing dentistry, thinking that that was going to be my life. But as my kids were getting older and I was seeing the things my kids and their friends were being challenged by, I started shifting into more and more youth work and community building. 5 years ago, I completely stepped aside from dentistry to focus on youth facilitation and youth development. So my hair is actually wet right now because I just got back from camping. I led a retreat this weekend, and this kind of shares what really matters to me. It was a retreat where I co-facilitated with a partner. We took 20 teenagers. It was a campsite in Glendale. And the weekend was spent, it was the first time the teens spent this time together. They're going to be together for the year. And we work on communication skills, leadership skills, and addressing the social hierarchies that kids find themselves challenged with in school, at work, in life. But the thing that's really fascinating about the work is that we go out of our way to include young people who are differently abled, who comes from diverse backgrounds. We have students that don't identify in ways that many people are used to identifying. And so there's these beautiful opportunities for each of us to grow. And I learned so much from the young people this weekend. Some things that I wasn't familiar with, but when I saw it through these new perspectives, I came to new realizations about some of the challenges we face in our communities. So I really appreciate that work, and I'm hoping to bring that perspective of working with kids to see how we can make sure every kid is supported and feels cherished and valued in the classroom, is able to access what they need to access to reach their full potential. On mental health, kids are still really struggling. At the Chamber of Commerce Forum, I mentioned that the Google form to access a mental health therapist at PV High was not working, and I'm like, I'm sure tomorrow it will be working now, and it was still not working. So meaning if a kid is having a hard time, they can't reach someone at that school site right now. So I think intentions are good. I have found everyone at the district to be very interested in figuring out what they can do better, to have a collaborative spirit, but there's still, we need to take a more systems approach to problem solving, stepping back, looking from the balcony to see how one change impacts other groups of people, how we can run things in a way where we are overall moving towards our fulfilling our values. So I'm hoping to listen deeply across all the different communities. We have lots of stakeholders with different interests and different perspectives. I'm hoping to grow and learn alongside Ami and whoever else gets elected to the board. I'm grateful to be here today amongst friends. Thank you.
So I neglected to introduce Rick Phillips. Rick Phillips is on the PVPUSD board right now, and he chose not to run for re-election. And he was going to be on our panel, and I thought he was going to be out of town, but he's on the Zoom. So I just want to recognize that he is taking the time to be on Zoom with us today.
I hope he chimes in.
Yeah. Okay. So since what has been talked about here, I'm going to move to my first question being about communication. So the district and the local school administrations communicate to both the teachers and the students, and sometimes that communication doesn't go too well, and there's been a lot of criticism of it. So, for example, during the pandemic, all the COVID mandates, masking, was communicated. There's dress code, there's been discipline, there's been changes in board policy. And so I'm not going to get into, well, maybe one particular that's been brought up. There was a policy change about transgender and gender-based, in terms of how people are communicated with. That came down in June. And so I guess what I want to ask the panel, so everything that I've just said, what has been your experience with the communication that has come both from the school district and from your local school, and how, like you just gave an example in terms of the Google Forms, but in terms of this type of communication, and what do you think has been the worst and maybe the best in terms of and what needs to be improved? So I'm going to start at that side again, and then we'll mix it up. But you don't have to. If you say something and someone wants to respond on the panel, feel free to do that.
We can be
this is a discussion.
We can be the view.
Yeah. You can be
Okay.
the view.
And if you're not ready, I will.
I'm not, yeah, because I am more of a,
Yes.
I'm on the front lines, so I've been doing this job so much, I just do it, and I'm not exactly sure where the issues are. I don't know if it was from superintendent to parent. I do understand parents feel like they're not communicated with, and I do have 2 children in our district, but maybe because I just know the policies, I don't.
Right.
I don't know. So yes, somebody else can start.
Can I
I'm happy
maybe
to.
offer a reframe of the question that
Yes.
maybe you could share something that would be helpful that I'm interested in?
Sure.
I have also heard that oftentimes teachers don't feel communicated with or included in decision making, that there's some gap in communication there. So maybe you could
Okay,
share
that makes
a little bit about that.
Thank you for that. Each school is required to have it's called an FAC, a Faculty Advisory Committee, and that is in our PVFA contract. So our PVFA is our Palos Verdes Faculty Association. That's also known as our union, and it includes not only teachers but counselors, school psychologists, school nurses, and a lot of the staff there. And so they try to get representation of everyone, and then that group is supposed to meet with the principal, I believe, monthly to express any concerns of the staff. Now, just being on the bargaining team where I hear, it's not just Peninsula, I hear the other high schools, I hear all the elementary schools, it doesn't always work, or there's not strong, if you don't have, some schools will say we don't have an FAC, and I'm like, well, that's not okay. But you also have to have people that want to be on it. So I think we've worked really hard in PVFA to strengthen those committees, because I think they're really important, especially since most of us are on the front lines with the students and seeing things that we are able to meet with administration more regularly. But I definitely know it's a work in progress, because not every school knew that they could have one or that was supposed to happen. But we, with how many numbers in our, is it 500? I'm exaggerating, but it's a lot to kind of get the word out to. So communication, even within PVFA, to our members, I'm sure they have, struggles too.
I'm happy to speak to this subject. If you're, So I did attend the candidates forum the other evening, and I really enjoyed listening to all the candidates and their platforms. But I think something that we neglected to talk about is something as remedial as return phone calls and customer service. And so I'd like to talk about much more sophisticated platforms for communication, but alone just getting a call back from the district, it can prove challenging, both from teachers, from the community, and as a parent who also has a child that's struggling with social anxiety and needed some intervention. And so what I'm finding is that as a community leader, and oftentimes the presidents of the PTSAs are perceived as community leaders, I field telephone calls from presidents of HOAs in our communities who are trying to talk to the principals about traffic and or traffic abatement and noise abatement at drop-off. They speak to administration at the school, and the response was, in this particular case, I don't know how, there's nothing I can do for you. It is what it is. And so then the person called me and said, do you know who I can call at the district to get a return phone call? We're having an ongoing issue. Our HOA would like to participate and lean in and partner with the school on how to address these issues, but no one will return my calls. And so the advantage, again, today for not being an employee and not running for office is that I can be very honest about some of the issues and concerns that we see as a community. But in addition to that, there are other issues. We've had incidences on campus or various campuses where the students came home with some communication about the incident. Parents were not informed in the same fashion, and parents were looking for information. And again, at the platform, they talked about the HR issues or the legal aspects of not being able to communicate HR issues. But there are some things that the district can communicate so that there isn't confusion between the students, the parents, and the faculty members. And there was a rumor at one of the middle schools that we had an active shooter threat. And that was never communicated in our community. And that's just so critical, but it was on social media. And so it was communicated. And so I didn't understand the district's reservation as to why not to address it if it's already in the public eye on social media. And that's just one of many examples that we've seen in this last year that truly need to be addressed. And we need to see greater transparency overall, whether it's the budget or communications as it relates to teaching our schools. Some of the issues that I've faced, and this is the last thing I'll say because I know there are others that want to speak, but homework for each grade level, and the school board issues a maximum number of hours recommended for students, and that information is not readily available to parents or to faculty members. But inevitably, we see faculty members giving an exceeding amount of homework, especially certain grades, and they're notorious, and we haven't addressed those. So it's things like that, and then, miss tales about how we're doing. I mean, my 6th grade class coming into Ridgecrest is at 280, which is very small. So I don't know if maybe the lower grades are seeing an increased population, but certainly not in the middle school, and our PTA funds are being, they're decimated as a result. So we're really addressing the students and trying to raise money. So, but I sometimes think that there's misinformation being presented to us as well. And on that, I yield again.
Well, I do believe that the district does try its best to keep communication as open as possible. And there are instances where there is issues with that would be related to HR, where it doesn't matter how much, that somebody would want to communicate that, there's just reasons that they can't. But with that being said, I can understand the need for more transparency. And that's one of the reasons there are so many advisory committees. There's an elementary advisory committee, a middle school advisory committee, a high school advisory committee. There's a medical advisory committee. Now there's a mental health advisory committee. There's the budget advisory committee. There's the facilities advisory committee. And so the purpose of all these committees is to be able to communicate and to hear from our community as to what's important and what's working and what's not.
It's a tough one, and I think as a parent, I share your frustration. I feel like as a parent, I chose this community because I really enjoy the feel of a small community where my kids go to the neighborhood school, and we kind of have that mom and pop town feel, right? Mm-hmm. Which a lot of us really appreciate. But I think the district has really changed and evolved. Our demographics have changed, and the communication techniques and styles haven't adapted. We still kind of employ the small town communication. And some of the gaps I just want to mention too that I think are important. During COVID, the 2020 through 2021, the middle schools were offering a remediation program. So there was a small group of people that were being brought onto campus if they were identified by teachers as falling really behind in learning. And they were offered the ability to come in person. I was working with a couple of teens, not my children, and trying to work with them during the pandemic because mother is a single mother, does not have computer literacy, English is not a first language. And so I was working with them as often as I could, and they really fell off the radar, like completely fell through the gaps, lost at least easily 2 years of learning. So So I called the middle school to ask, I heard there was this remediation program, and how come this family wasn't invited to the remediation program? And so I was informed that, well, we let out all the families know, the kids that were flagged, their parents were communicating with us. How were the parents communicated with? And this was a small group of kids. We sent an email. What if a parent doesn't know how to use email? And there are people that don't know how to use email. That's an important gap. Language and computer literacy should not be taken for granted. So that one was really disappointing and hurtful to me. It's the district's job to meet everyone's needs. I think the other one that I want to touch upon is it's the transparency in the process that's not there. And this really shows up when it comes to curriculum and things around budget, which impacted the Measure PV movement. There is a committee that works on curriculum adoption. I think if you reach out to them, and I have done that in that past, I've reached out to Dr. Katanda to say, hey, what are the books you're considering right now for social studies? I was immediately told you can come to the district, you can check them out. But it's very hard as a parent to follow the process and understand what were the questions the teachers and the committee were considering when they're evaluating the textbooks. What were the conversations? How did they arrive at this conclusion? And that creates opportunity for when there's a gap in that communication and you don't know how we arrived at a solution, it can breed distrust, it can breed misunderstanding. The example I recently came across was Redondo Beach adopted a new early reading curriculum. They have this fantastic website and you can follow who was on the committee, what days they met, what pieces of literature they read. You know, they read news articles or peer-reviewed pieces to understand how to approach reading. You could follow the whole process, and so you can trust the outcome better as a family member. Same with budget. It is impossible. I'm running for school board. I have spent countless hours pouring through the budget, watching board meetings over and over again, following along. It's really obscure, and there are districts that do make it accessible. The district I grew up in, Fremont Unified up north, they have this great FAQs page you can follow. It breaks down what things mean, how to be able to understand. And again, I don't think it's out of any maliciousness. We just haven't adapted and accepted that we are not a small town anymore. So that, I don't know, I'm willing to, I'd like to figure out, I have the same questions.
Okay, so just so we can get a lot of questions answered here, and we could just talk just specifically so we can get as much. So one of the things that came up in chat, and maybe Ami, you can address this, a lot of things have come down through the state in terms of mandates and things to do, whether it's, again, with the COVID, or books being banned, or, how, as I said, about gender and stuff. Can you say, in terms of the PVUSD on the council, have you guys, coalesce together, or are you seeing division? In terms of you being there and wanting to be reelected, someone's asking, is it been a good atmosphere, or are you getting what you have to say said? And
Sure. Of course, there's always challenges when there's differing points of view, but I do think as a district, as a board, everybody does try to work together. Now, when, going back to your initial statement about mandates coming down. So now this is challenging because if something comes down from the state or even from the county, that's something the school district has to follow. There's really no wiggle room in creating our own, basically,
Oasis.
yes, doing what we want to do with it, because at the end of the day, if it comes from the state or it comes from the county, our hands are tied. We're going to have to do that.
Okay, so that's important for people to know, because when there was such animosity at some of the school board meetings, people don't realize you're following what's being your guidance. You're just trying to implement.
I'm going to add something though, and it speaks to the bigger picture, and on point exactly. Is it this year, as we're watching the candidates pass through, it is very clear that we've politicized the school board in a way that I'm just disappointed.
Right.
And I think we're all disappointed. That's a platform that we would hope that everyone would be working in our children's best interest and not with a political agenda on either side. And I say that as a Democrat.
And that's why in in our get together here, you know, if something comes up that's not factual, you call it out, and I think that's also what they're doing with the school board. So one of the
Go, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I also don't like overturning the will of the people. We elect our state legislators. We elect a lot of the Department of Education folk. That's our community members voting on who they want to represent us. Some positions are appointed by elected leaders. Okay, so we'll make room for that. But if the legislators write laws, these legislators are elected by the people, I don't understand how it makes sense for us to override the will of the people. And I don't see how we can apply law and order in one arena of issues in policymaking, but not in other. We need systems to be honored and respected. There should be room for, raising questions, and and we can adjust according to a community, but they exist for a reason.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on one other thing. When I say that if there's a state mandate or even a county mandate, that's something that we have to follow. That doesn't mean the district doesn't take into account the local community, because the local community definitely has a voice, and the district does its best to try to listen to that voice and adjust policies accordingly. But in many cases, a lot of the things that have come up, there's no room to change anything. So, it's a balancing act, but definitely the local community is always a priority, and it's something that's always taken into account when decisions are being made.
Okay, so on that line, we just came through a heat wave. You hear that school started during the heat wave. Some of the classrooms don't have AC, or they're going out and doing PE and there's no shade, or there's been a lot of stuff talked about. So there's a lot of problems with our facilities, and there's a lot of problems in terms of how you fund those changes and how it comes down. So let's talk about what do you think in terms of facility improvement should be the top ones, and in terms of how that funding should happen. And I know it's come up in the forums as well, that should there be a bond issue or not, but just, you don't have to talk about that as much as we all know we need some more funding for our schools. But what would be your top facility changes? It could be any. You don't have to go in anywhere.
Wrong time to ask me. It was a really rough week for me at work because of my facility, and I feel bad even saying it out loud because I'm not trying to rat anyone out, but there is some sort of dead rodent in my ceiling or wall, and the fumes are so horrible that you can't be in the office. And so it started smelling this week, but I had COVID way earlier in the summer, and I still have a weird sense. I'm like, oh, why would it smell like that, right? Then by day, Thursday, I came into work with an upset student, so we immediately went into my office. I closed the door, and it was, oh my gosh, I have this really crying student. I'm overwhelmed by this smell, and I can't be in my office. I haven't been able to be in my office all week, so finding different areas to meet with my students where I still have confidentiality and that kind of stuff has been challenging. Everyone's working on it. They're doing the best they can, but they cannot find wherever it decided to pass away in the wall or whatever. But being there 20 years, it's very normal to have cockroaches, vermin, feces. So, I mean, I know I'm supposed to then not be available, refuse to be there, but I also have to be there for the kids. So it puts a lot of educators in a tough predicament where we're trying to do our best, and we're trying to be world class as we communicate to everybody, when those on the front lines are like, really, this is what we're bragging about to our community, and does anyone really know how desolate these places are? So I only know from working at Penn, it's bad. I know Linda Kurt, who was teacher of mine who just retired, concrete has fallen off. She brought that to the forum. That was an idea. My oldest is a PV intermediate 6th grader. I guess I didn't realize the whole school doesn't have air condition. Because back when I was a kid, we didn't have air conditioning. You can open your window and you have this breeze. And I think all the schools on the ocean don't have air conditioning because of the beautiful breeze that we had. And that's a hard one for me because we have a heat wave now for how many years in basically end of August to almost Halloween. Because you don't know if you can put your kid in the really sweaty Halloween costume or the other one. I do think it's important, but I'm also afraid of buildings falling and it being unsafe with just like rodents. So I don't, again, I'm worried on all in how to fund it and how to fix it.
Look at the color pile.
Someone else has it, yeah. So when you ask the question of how to fund it or fix it, that's why I'm going to vote for my people to figure that out. But because I don't know, like I know that if we don't pass these measures, so I feel like it's, well, the bond didn't pass, so we can't do anything. And I'm like, oh, I don't think we can just not do anything, but how do we, get strategic about where I guess you really got to look at where we're putting the money. And then, then when the teachers go ask for a fair raise, we could hear, nope, we got to fix all these buildings. So you guys have to go on the back burner. It's always, something, and I know we can't have it all, but there's got to be a way to meet in the middle to make everything fair. So
You don't have to go in order, though.
Yeah, okay.
I think.
Go. You're on.
Yeah, you know what? I completely agree with you. Our schools don't look the way that they rank. And this is a really big issue. And it's something that I think everybody is aware of. So now the issue is, how are we going to go about and start fixing this? And the problem starts, I think the problem, first and foremost, it starts with the way schools are funded, right? So when you look at school funding, you get your ADA, which is the the daily rate for each child for attending school. And then if you are in a let's say you're in LAUSD, you're going to get extra money for the free and reduced lunches, or you're going to get extra money for English as a second language. So, just looking at that second bucket of money, firstly, if you look at PVPUSD, we get about $10,000 per student. Compare that to something like LAUSD, and they're getting about $20,000 per student. So there's really already a big discrepancy with funding. But overall, in looking at funding, facilities was never calculated into that. All that funding is assigned for either education, free and reduced lunches, or English as a second language, additional programming. So, getting the funding for schools is definitely a real issue, and it's an issue that I wouldn't say that we're alone in. We just have to figure out how we're going to move forward with it and how we're going to get it done. This year, I think we're in a really unique situation because we do have a surplus. So it's exciting to be able to say that some of that money from that surplus will go into fixing our facilities. However, the amount of money we have, even though it's exciting and it seems pretty big, isn't going to cover the full extent of what needs to be done. So long term, there is going to have to be another solution there.
I have a very quick statement. There's no way to avoid a bond initiative. And there's no other platform or mechanism in which to pay for all the deferred maintenance throughout the district. Amen. And there's just, between the air conditioning and all of I watched all of the parsing on Nextdoor of the language and the accusations, and it was so unfortunate that the bond initiative became about something else. Unfortunately, I thought it was a poorly executed campaign, and that there again, the challenges were with communications. And this is where my background in fundraising comes into play, because I've done lots of campaigns, and I was disheartened to see that there were so few parents brought together to create, or not even parents. There was an argument that the senior community would not support the bond initiative. And I maintain as a realtor that the reason our housing prices are maintained and we continue to see appreciation is because of the school district. There we go, right?
Yes.
So to that end, there's no way to avoid a bond initiative. I don't think we should be apologetic about it, nor should we reduce the amount go full on bond initiative, and I'm done.
But I think, like you said, communication is key. Communicating the entire process to the community.
It was a poorly executed campaign.
So I sat on the facilities committee this last year, and first it takes a couple of meetings to just figure out what's going on, where we are as a district. Again, because communication, it's really hard to find information. And so my suggestion was, and we did actually come up with this, a flow chart that kind of identifies the top needs that we have right now in terms of facilities. And then it shows us tapping into federal funds, state funds, because there are these buckets of money that are available for various projects like the seismic mitigation program. I mentioned this at Chamber of Commerce. Our school district has never pursued the state bucket of money to address the seismic issues some of our buildings have. And so we should tap into money if it's sitting there. It's hard to access sometimes. Yes, you have to apply for a waiver of the matching funds, but it's possible, and we have received a waiver in the past. And so clearly communicating, community, we don't want to push you beyond your limits, but look, we're doing everything that we can. We've looked into the state level funds, we've looked at federal funds, we've worked on our own budget, skimmed wherever we could, and here we are. Now we really need this bond measure. Communicating the whole process is what's really needed. And we just haven't done a good job of that. It's really heartbreaking. I agree with you. Most likely, we could tap out all the buckets of money and we're still going to need
We're still going to need money, but again, I maintain that our property values are predicated on our excellent school district, and the entire community benefits from that. We need a community group to come together and support the bond initiative.
Right. Okay.
Can I make one more comment?
Go ahead.
On the bond, the other part is, I don't think there's anybody sitting in this room or anywhere else that's like, hey, let's increase taxes. I don't think that's, the goal for anybody. So really with the bond measure, it's really understanding what the wants are versus the needs, and really focusing on the needs and moving forward with those projects to getting our schools where they need to be. And then the other part of that is, which I think everybody has mentioned at some point, getting the community involved, because the entire community has to feel ownership of our facilities. And if that is there, then I think everybody would be more likely to accept a new bond measure.
I'd like to jump in, Anne, if I could.
Yeah.
Who is that?
That's Rick.
Oh, go ahead.
All right.
All right.
So let me just kind of clarify some things. So the responsibility of the school board is to actually put the bond on the ballot. That's what we do as a board. We vote to put the bond on the ballot, and we set the maximum level of the bond. The campaign committee was a separate entity from the school board, and the district is prohibited by law from actually campaigning in support of a bond measure. So I'll agree that we didn't do as great a job communicating as possible. The campaign committee that was set up, an independent campaign committee, was actually led by a professional campaign consultant whose job, full-time job, is actually to win campaigns, and had been successful in another state, but obviously wasn't successful in that particular campaign. Also, I think the need for the bond is obvious, and there were 30 people, I think, that listened to my board comments at the end of the last meeting, but I pointed out essentially that, hey, if you're upset about having kids in 90-degree heat without, air conditioning, you got to look to the community. They turned down the bond that would have paid for that. And without a bond, we're not going to have air conditioning in our schools. It's as simple as that. There just is not the kind of funding that's necessary to do those kinds of projects. And so it's really important to pass a bond at some point. And even if the bond was $400 million, just because it was passed, that's the maximum authorization level. That didn't mean the district necessarily had to spend $400 million. How much actually got spent, and how it was spent, was up to the Board of Education, after the bond was passed. So the community really missed an opportunity. There's also a time of record low interest rates when the bond measure was on the ballot. And now we're faced with this issue that there isn't a bond right now, which is an election year, and you're only allowed to pass a bond with a 55% threshold in a real election year. So those are the even years. So the next time the community will have an opportunity really to vote on a bond, should the Board of Education in the future choose to put one on the ballot, will be in 2024. And that really means that, any projects probably, the air condition the schools wouldn't get completed until, 26 at the latest. I mean, at the earliest. So I really think that it was a shame that we didn't pass it. And it's also the first time in the history of Palos Verdes that there was an organized opposition effort to a locally funded measure. Not all taxes are bad, right? There's a lot of taxes that I complain about. I hate sending money to Sacramento that doesn't come back down. But we failed to pass a tax where 100% of the dollars were going to be spent in our community for the benefit of our kids. And to me, that was a real shame.
Can I ask a question? For those of us who don't know, what was the opposition saying? You skirted around it, but
that it was poorly conceived, that it was too much money, that because it was, in there as 30-year bonds, that it cost too much in interest costs, that there were too much in soft costs, which were ridiculous because the soft costs are just, when you estimate the size of a project, you have to include some amount for soft costs, i.e. management and architecture and things. And it's just a cost estimation factor. It's not actually a true cost that you say, oh, I have to spend this. That's what that's the realistic cost. And but the campaign committee chose, those who led it, chose not to take on the anti folks on those issues and focus kind of on the positive message of improving the infrastructure of the district with plumbing and other things. And I think it was the most expensive pro bond campaign or pro any local measure that in the history of the peninsula, and it didn't work. It wasn't run correctly in my mind. But that's, like I said,
somehow they did it better. And
if you were to ask the
spending any money.
students,
right, because the pro side,
they want an improvement on their bathrooms.
Yes,
Yeah,
that comes
so-
up a lot.
Which is great because
Which
they
is
received $500,000
Yeah.
this year to get those new bathrooms from Almer Suchi.
Yeah.
You know what though, like the opposition, they still have, the page is still up. There's this great page online that breaks down pro bond measure, anti bond measure. Their entire argument is very clearly articulated, all their data points. What I was disappointed by was when I was on the facilities committee, we were doing all the same things. We're not going to get a different result.
No.
The work's right there. We should be
Yes.
crunching through that information. Repeating the same actions will not yield a different response.
Well, I wouldn't anticipate either a facilities committee to establish and maintain communications either. And this is a facilities community or committee, and they establish what kinds of capital improvements are going to happen, but they're not the communications platform. And I too have been directed to sit in on the facilities meetings, knowing full well that that's not what's going to get us to the next step and advance
Right.
the initiative.
So I thought Rick articulated very well. Kelly, you had one comment?
So hang on one second. Let me just finish that point on that. Because sorry, Lorraine. Sorry, Kelly. But what happened last time, just so people understand, that facilities committee last time, which actually had some very qualified people to say what the project should be, then morphed once the bond was actually passed to be on the ballot by the Board of Education. That morphed into the campaign committee and was, with this campaign consultant essentially at the lead, the head of the communications effort. So that is the transition that occurred last time with the bond campaign.
Go ahead.
Well, when I was obviously for the bond, but one of my biggest things is to know me or my family. We're big jocks. My dad coached through Peninsula High School till about 5 years ago. And I am very interested in our fields. I sit on AYSO, softball board, basketball board. I sit on every sports board you possibly can. And I'm looking at these 10-year-olds who are going to have literally injuries. They're going to blow out an ankle and never be able to play again in their life because of the fields. And mental health, we're talking about mental health. I have kids at the high school. If they didn't have the soccer team or the football team, there would be nothing for them. So I wanted to know what part was not only going to the fields, but then how about the youth access to the fields? Because I am constantly shut down anytime we want access to these fields or overflow. And I know we're all fighting high schools and all that, but I need to make sure that everything we're doing is for our K to 12, right? And that because kids, we need outlets for kids for their mental health, and we need safe, not only facilities, we need safe fields. So that was a little bit hard to find. Like, was that, hopefully the fields were going to be part of it.
The
But
pretense for the tagline was safety and security. And so we no longer addressed the academic nor the athletic needs of the district. And that was the pretense over time, is that it was the only reason for the bond initiative was for safety and security. And we all know there's so much deferred maintenance on all of the buildings, and our programmatic interests have changed over the years, and we need to address those as well with the bond initiative. So you're right.
Okay, I'm going to pivot a little bit to the curriculum because it does touch on the mental health as well. But so there's an ethnic studies class that has been implemented, and some people are calling that critical race theory. There's also parents that are trying to ban books. And I was just wondering, in terms of these issues that are being articulated, what is your feel for how the school district is addressing these curriculum changes, and what do you think are the main curriculum issues? So again, not in order, who wants to go first?
Who would like to start?
And just keep it to the point, and then we'll.
Sure. I don't think in this group we need to define CRT and ethnic studies, I hope.
No.
Okay, great. I do think that there is more need for community awareness and community education, although the board did have public board, all the board meetings are public, where there was discussion on ethnic studies. There was very open discussion on what the course was going to look like. Groups were allowed opportunity to chime in. So they did conduct it in an open fashion. And I was surprised. There were no concerns about the ethnic studies curriculum during those board meetings, where I believe the board posted beforehand that it was going to be on the agenda. So that is something that I was baffled by, that there's all this attacking on this. I'm not going to conjecture why that happened. Perhaps we could, again, provide more information to the community, like those website pages that kind of show, hey, we're doing this, this is how we arrived at this conclusion. I think that perhaps was missing. But that was my own experience with this, because our family did participate in that ethnic studies discussion.
I think the resistance in the end, and this is where we can do the view panel discussion, the resistance related to the curriculum as expressed by the candidates, some of the candidates anyway, is that we didn't want any blame shaming on any, and so that's how it was articulated during the, that conversation can continue down a lot of different paths, so I won't go down there, but I know you have stuff that you want to share.
Well, no, I think you guys covered it pretty well, but I was going to say, that's also why we have the Curriculum Advisory Committee, so that parents can get involved and have their voices heard and have a discussion about what they think is the appropriate curriculum for school. But bigger than that, anytime a new curriculum is piloted, it's piloted for an entire year, and the parents they receive a letter home saying this is going to be piloted, and they have the entire year to look at that curriculum, to read through it, flag anything that they think is inappropriate. And most of the time in these scenarios, it goes through and there's really no red flags to any certain curriculum that's being adopted. The other thing is, you talked about board meetings, and the board involvement. It's always agendized so that if anybody has an opinion and wants to bring it up, they can. But the other part is, there's many times where we go back and review something based on comments that are made during a board meeting, just to make sure that everything that has been said is actually true and accurate. So there's a lot of different steps that go into making sure that we adopt a curriculum that is appropriate.
And can I add something else? And it's on the same, I'm sorry, say that again.
Oh, Go ahead. And then there's a question.
Oh, okay. I just want to add, at Ridgecrest Intermediate School, it was my goal, because we have several PAs that represent the diversity that we have on campus. And I've met with all 3 PAs, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, because I thought it was so important that we all work in the same direction and partner throughout the year. And they were so appreciative for the reach out. And I was too, because I thought it was wonderful. We're working on an international fair, and I wanted to make sure that everyone feels included, and that language shouldn't be a barrier, because I only speak one, and bless them for speaking more. But I wanted to make sure that they felt included and part of the partnership that we have on school. So speaking to that curriculum in particular, and you said there was a question out here.
Yes, can you explain when you say pilot? Walk me through what a pilot program looks like. How piloting do you get?
Repeat the question. Who do you want to answer that question?
To you.
Oh.
You were talking about a pilot program.
Sure.
Explain to me how it is piloted. What are the processes?
So first,
Repeat her question.
how is the program or a new curriculum piloted? So first, and I apologize if I forget any steps, but I believe first the teachers get to look at it. So there's a few different curriculums that are always looked at. And the teachers that are, let's say it's social studies, and the teachers look at the different social studies curriculums that are available, and they're going to pick one based on, they go through like a rigorous process, and they finally narrow it down to the one that they want to pilot. At that point, the curriculum is open to the students, for that grade, whatever grade level it is, and the students get a letter sent home, so the parents can be involved as well. So at any point in that year, if there's a student has a problem with the curriculum or any questions about it, they can bring that up. And parents have that same right as well to bring, if they come up with something that they're concerned with, to get their concerns addressed. So that's usually how the curriculum is piloted.
And I think with this one, the times I get most saddened or disappointed in our community is when we lose sight of just raising good human beings, and we get so caught up in all this political stuff. And the children, I'm only with the children, right? But I'm hearing all the stuff that's going on. People are like, do you love your job? I'm like, I love the kid part of my job. But so much of this other stuff is getting in the way of letting me just help children just get through some of the hardest times of their life. We're losing sight of just raising good human beings so that we can be proud in the workforce of, who they are, or just, as a wife or a husband or a mom or a dad one day. One of the best classes I took was comparative religions. Now, in that class, no one was trying to change my religion. Instead, it was educating me on all walks of life where people will come from. So then later in life, when I saw anyone wearing like a headpiece, I kind of understood maybe what kind of religion that was. I mean, getting to know people and our differences, the fact that we truly think in schools we're trying to brainwash kids, or at least in our district, I've only born and raised here, worked here, that we would ever try to like influence or brainwash them in any way. That's where I get really sad and disappointed in our community. And the kids are watching this stuff. The kids are watching how the adults are behaving, and some of them are watching. We have school board members, children's student school board members that sit in our meetings. They're watching all of this.
Recording in.
All of it is just to help us be better human beings, and to accept everybody from any walk of life.
Teachers were affected.
Just one second. So are we all muted?
I'm just going to say, if teachers were effective at brainwashing, my kids would love math. That just hasn't happened, but we're concerned about it.
I'm going to follow up with you.
I wanted to answer the ethnic studies one.
Oh, go ahead.
Because with ethnic studies, I think it's also really important to understand voters in California elected legislators who then passed a law mandating ethnic studies. So ethnic studies is going to be required by the state. We have some time before we have to implement it. So what that looked like in our district was that the schools, I think Penn High and PV High both, they offered it as an elective this year. And what I heard, 2 years in a row. And what I heard from I attended that class a couple times and talking to the teachers who taught it, The students were thrilled with the class, the parents only had good feedback, and I thought that's been really disappointing, that those who are impacted, who actually took the class, understood the class, had great things to say about it. And that's been lost in all this conversation. And the other piece about people being able to live with each other, a lot of my work is around religious pluralism and developing that muscle to respect and love someone, even if they live in a way that doesn't make sense for you, or that you don't understand, or that might be different than yours. We really need to do everything we can to empower our kids to understand pluralism. And so if these classes, I think they're critical in teaching our kids how to work in a global economy. They have to be able to interact with people with different experiences. It shouldn't make us worried. Last thing I'm going to say, as a parent, I don't want to have to build curriculum, because that would be homeschooling, and I don't want to do that. It's a lot of work. So I appreciate the teachers and the experts doing their job. Letting parents know and have a voice is great, but in balance.
As a follow-up, you've implied, I'm going to ask LaRae because she can speak most freely. But you've all implied that there are other voices out there with a different point of view, but it hasn't stated specifically what they're saying. And I think that would be instructive if we knew what those voices are saying.
I think I did suggest that during the platform the other day, that we heard from some candidates that were concerned that this curriculum blames certain ethnicities instead of enhance or speak to the history of others. And so the focus in this class is to expand knowledge base about all ethnicities, and that's a great way to describe it, and to celebrate them.
How large a fraction is that, would you say?
There's a large group.
I don't know how large, but it's loud.
They're vocal.
And they're calling it harm, and they're calling it harmful ideology. So I don't want to spend that much more time and give them voice here, but
I think people need to understand the entire dynamic that's going on.
I think Anne's described it well, though. I think that
that's on their website, and both in social media.
Somebody else said
very loud
that it's an issue that's been politicized. It's curriculum being politicized. So.
Which is what's being brought to the campaign this year, and why this is so important that we have this platform.
So I'm going to direct this first at you, Kelly, just because we see the students in terms of the mental health. And there's a lot of things in terms of their mental health, with school safety, with the academic demands, like you were saying, in terms of perhaps some of the sports and stuff, and then just regular health. And I guess I would like to hear what are the main things that you're seeing from the students, and how do you see the district or your school counteracting?
Because I have the perspective of starting when I was 24, before I had children, I used to think that it was, maybe the high schools or Peninsula High, it is pretty academic, causing this mental health, right? And then as I started to have my own children, go through elementary school, and now I have a 5th grader and a 6th grader, I've seen the big picture. And I think I've given at least 2 or 3 school board presentations, felt heard at the time, but I've never been able to make change. Although I said I'm gonna die in this community. And so before I die, we will have a comprehensive school counseling program. We still do not. So it's hard when I feel like I feel like I've been set up to fail every single day, because we are a reactive district to mental health. There are no school counselors in elementary school. So then we implemented the therapist, and I'm very thankful for the therapist, but that's a tier 4 service. When we look at tiers of is it like a easy crisis, and then it goes up and up and up, correct? So I find at the high school in the last, even before COVID, I would say in the last 8 years, we're at tier 4 all the time. And that's where the therapists are super helpful for us, because it can be life and death so often because of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideations. When I first started, my first 10 years, I would come home and be like, whoa, to my husband, I was a counselor today. And maybe that happened like 3 times a year, because usually it's just like going to their games or being their cheerleader, or, and then it was like real stuff. And that kept getting more intense. But as I became really involved just in my students' elementary school, there's so many little tier 1 and tier 2 problems there that are not being addressed. So either they have to sit outside, or it's just addressed between the teacher and the principal, all which were educators first, not necessarily mental health backgrounds. Our district will say, well, they have a school psychologist. Well, yes, they have usually one school psychologist that typically, because the special ed population is usually who they're working with, so they're not usually seeing, they don't have time to see all of that. When we threw a therapist into an elementary school, if that student had a bad day and needed to be removed from the classroom, they can't go to the therapist because you need a parent release to see the therapist. So now we've put all these barriers into getting mental health that they need in elementary school. A school counselor, I can see your kid every single day if I want to, and I don't have to tell you. Now, if they're at harm to self or others, obviously, but that's why in the high school, kids wave to me, it's cool to see your school counselor, because we meet there's things that we service. It's a pet peeve of mine to be called an academic counselor, because if all I did was academic, it would be a very easy job. But we are school counselors. We handle college, career, personal, social, and academic. So that personal social piece has really taken over not only intermediate school, but also high school, to where I'm looking at about 80 letters of rec, and I don't know how I'm going to do that when I'm seeing kids that are coming in suicidal or depression, and I don't know how to balance that anymore. It's getting too much. But if some of these problems, you can look at these kids, you can look at where they came from, you can look at the elementary background, we have their cues, and you can see all of the little kind of quirky behavior, little problems they had in elementary school, and there just wasn't the support. The school counselor could be meeting with them, giving them social skills, maybe doing little groups, lots of things. Again, I've given this presentation, so I'm exhausted I'm exhausted that I keep having to have it, but I'm not going to stop. It's something, and everyone's like, it costs money. I know it costs money, but we can't make mental health a priority until we build a comprehensive program at every level, or the problems that are being ignored here are just going to get exacerbated at high school, where the costs are super high, and then everyone's at a loss. When I see kids now, I used to see them freshman year and all the way to senior year, and I'd be like, I really helped that kid get through some tough times. And now it's like, I help them get through tough times just to go to their therapist, but I don't necessarily see it getting better in those 4 years, because it's really that deep. And I am just school counselors are psychological first aid. We're trained to be the Band-Aid to assess the immediate crisis. Can they go back to class? Do we need to call home? Do we need to refer to a therapist? And luckily we do have the therapists on campus. And so that has been helpful, especially in the crisis when we do need to be assessed, where it's, but there's still, we can do things so much better, and we can be doing more. So that's why sometimes it's exhausting, but I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to leave. So that's been kind of my passion and what I've seen. Now I always get off on my tangent. I hope I answered a question.
No,
That was amazing.
that was excellent. I'm hoping the school district is also hearing this, and
They hear me.
And
they do try, believe me.
But you are so right that it shouldn't wait to middle school and high school.
It's too
I have a great example if you're
But
interested.
but before you go, I think
Go ahead.
Okay.
Do you want to? Okay. So, sort of, it's a personal story, but it's a great example of where I think we're not addressing kids' needs. And this wasn't about any additional expenses. I have an exceptional student as a daughter, and now currently in 8th grade, but not attending school. And I'm often asked if it was COVID, and it predates COVID, her social anxiety, but was exacerbated by Zoom. So I don't attribute it to our COVID years. But when we came back to in-person school, I petitioned the administrators and the counselors at school to make sure that she made the volleyball team, because she played volleyball very well. And And she didn't make the tryouts because of social anxiety. And as the executive vice president of PTSA, I thought that I could leverage my relationship in the school to help advance my child and make them feel connected and build relationships to their peers. And on every front, I was blocked. Every single front. She never made it on the team. I was told it was up to the coach. I went to the coach's office. I called the coach. I emailed the coach, and I got no response at all. She never made the team, and she's not in school today. And so it speaks to, yes, offering counseling, but this was something that was so easy, such an easy fix. And as Mommy Bear, I knew what we needed to do to connect her to the community, and I was denied access, and so was she on every front. So on that, I passed it.
But that's where we need to think outside of the box. So
We have to be willing.
I wouldn't,
Right.
I don't know your daughter's
Yes.
level of volleyball. And as a jock and a coach, I would never
Very good.
put a kid out there who's not as good as everybody else and they get embarrassed. But
She was, yes.
right, but I'm not going to say, I'm not going to go there. However, think outside of the box. Could she have been the team manager if she wasn't good enough to make the team? I don't know.
If somebody had returned my call,
Right,
then we could have had that conversation.
And
Yes.
I battle with admin at every level in our district to this is the grayest thing you will ever be in your life is education. If we can't think outside of the box, I've tried to think outside of the box of how we can get school counselors to elementary school if you can't afford one. Offer a stipend to one that will do some after school stuff. You have a ton in your district, just not at that level. This becomes, when it's black and white, it doesn't work. Every situation I'm in with mental health and counseling is a gray situation. And I know a lot of people that sit on the school board are business people and very black and white, and that's fine, but we have to, there's so many other ways to make kids included or feel included in school and think outside of the box that's the biggest challenge. I challenge my administrators, I challenge district staff, and sometimes I'm heard, sometimes I'm not. That doesn't mean I don't stop talking, but it is what it is.
Club volleyball player, by the way.
Okay.
So yeah, the first thing is we have counselors and we have therapists, and they're both great resources for our students. In this last year, we increased the number of therapists that we had to make sure that all students who needed access to a therapist could access one. But as we're hearing, I think the issue starts a lot younger, and we need intervention a lot younger. At one of the board meetings last year, the principal from Ridgecrest did this great presentation, and he presented a program that he does at Ridgecrest where all kids across 6th to 8th grade are put into 4 categories. So it's like the red group, the blue group, the yellow group, and green, I don't know, but it's like a Hogwarts style, okay? And basically all throughout the year, the kids work together and they compete on different things, whether it's academics or social or sports, and sports even against the teachers. And I was really impressed with this presentation because what it really does is creates community on a campus. And now a 6th grader who's just entering the school has access to an 8th grader. And so this is how I understood the program to be. And I thought this was so great, and it doesn't cost any money. And this is a very easy program for us to implement across all of our elementary schools. Because as we know, many times the mental health challenges come secondary to social isolation or bullying. So if we can incorporate such a program on our elementary campuses where all kids feel like they have another group that they belong to, maybe we won't see a lot of the problems as they're getting older. Now, the other thing I was really happy to see this year, I went to Miralest for their PTA coffee. And one of the things that I heard there was that cell phones are not allowed inside the classroom. So students have the option of leaving the cell phone in the locker, in their backpack, or now there's going to be little sleeves when they enter the classroom, if I understood correctly, and so they could drop it into the sleeve and then take it when they leave. And I think this is also another really important factor in helping our students with their mental health, because social media also plays a big role in a lot of the social concerns that our children face. So having less access to the cell phone not only gets them to focus more during the school day, but it could possibly help with mental health issues. And then the last point, and then I'm sorry, I talked a lot on this one. And the last point is we need to look at postgraduate programs because our students have a lot of resources available to them while they're in school. And then the minute they graduate, all resources are turned off. So that's another focus, another point of focus for all of us this year to figure out when kids graduate, how can we continue some of those, like a network of services for those students.
That one's a hard one for me because we're not servicing all of them. We're not servicing all of the ones we have, and then we want to go to ones that have graduated, and I'm with you, and we've lost so many graduates, lots. You know, I've had my own students, but we have to service the ones in our district before we talk about the adults after. That's just.
I agree. I think we have some critical gaps still with the kids we're responsible for. And I think to your point, the elementary school, I think a lot of learning impediments and needs get missed. And there ends up being a lot of focus on a child's behavior. And then that child gets caught in the punishment cycle. And then fast forward several years later, now you've got a mental health issue in high school that could have been mitigated at a much lower cost if something had been picked up in that early K through 2 time. So I think working with teachers and school site staff to figure out how we can do a better job of identifying learning impediments and meeting mental health needs at the elementary school level is going to be really critical. It'd be great. I wish we could help everyone, but I think that elementary school gap is really, really critical still.
Just to follow up on the elementary to middle school gap, not some elementary schools start in 4th and 5th grade to have more than one teacher teaching a subject, so that when they jump to middle school, they're not going from 1 teacher to 6 teachers. And that's such a big thing. I was just at a fair I was volunteering at, and this guy comes over with his middle school, and he just totally unloaded when because I had my daughter with me, and just, how was it for you, and he just says, my daughter fell apart. She just fell apart. She went from 1 teacher to 6 teachers. She was crying, she had to go to the principal, anyway. And I said, at Silversburg, they had 3 teachers. So, they had it, or you could have gone through the summer program. And that's not talked about as much. That is the hardest transition, actually, is between elementary.
And I think it changes every year. I'm at Silversburg, they have 1 teacher,
Oh.
so it changes
It
every year.
changes based on what the teacher, the 5th,
Yeah,
4th and 5th want to do.
I think it's because they have 2 brand new out of the 3 fifth, and they want them to do them all first, and then maybe they'll get there. But again,
anyway, I'm just saying it just is. It does need to be talked about.
We have a question.
I was just going to say, that almost seems like such an easy thing to resolve, because when I was in school, now, we went to elementary school in 6th grade, I think all of us did. But starting in 5th grade, we started moving classroom to classroom for all of our subjects. And we moved as a group in the same, everybody that was in your homeroom moved to your social studies class, and then, moved to your science class. So we moved in a group. The following year, you moved 2 of your classes in a group, and they figured out the logistics of mixing it up a little bit. And so when you went to the middle school, which was 10 times bigger than the elementary school, at least, you didn't go through the shock factor of going to a different classroom and people having different schedules.
So anyway, I think we all agree, but that is a small thing that can be negotiated, talked about, but it definitely affects the mental health of actually not just the students, but the poor parents. These kids are coming home and just breaking down.
It offers another opportunity too. There are a lot of students that struggle with transition.
Yeah.
They actually have a hard time. They need extra time to arrange things at their table, or they have some routines that they hang on to for their mental health or for their ability to learn. So by implementing that program, you kind of get an opportunity to identify those needs before they get to.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's true.
And I have one of the.
There's a bunch of OCD or ADHD
who couldn't transition
Okay, we are running out of time, and I do, there's a few things we haven't talked about, but we have talked most about the subjects. But one of the things that does, because of what Parkland, Florida is in the news because the shooter's on trial. And Uvalde, Texas, the aftermath and what happened there. And so it gets talked about. And then just recently, Hollywood High School just had a shooting hoax. I don't know if the hoax was, I think you talked about a hoax that was here.
PBIS.
So, all this is in the news and it's very distressful for everyone. And so I know the school district is trying to address these safety things, and it gets to the brink of, do you fence around your school, or do you just figure it out in terms of being able to train people on what to do? So maybe someone wants to talk to that. This is our last question, and then
I'll let the Ken. We have too many guns in our society. That's what I have to say. But I'll let the candidates speak to that.
Well, I think it's important to spend some time thinking about how school shootings happen. And even for me, I spent 1 month just reading everything I could find on school shootings. And I actually learned that some of my own preconceived notions were wrong. Volume of guns does matter, but most school shooters don't go out and purchase a gun. They usually steal it from a parent, a neighbor, an uncle. So it's a gun that's already out there somewhere. So promoting secure gun storage and responsible gun ownership, which for some reason the entities that should be doing it are not promoting that anymore. So promoting secure gun storage is really important. In California, we also have this extreme risk law where if a teacher or a parent or a neighbor feels that there is credible threat that someone's about to commit a violent act, there is a civil process, not with any criminal ramifications, where you can ensure that that person doesn't have access to weapons. And of course, the background checks still do help. So the person usually gets the gun from someone that already owns a gun. To the shooter is usually a student, sometimes a recent graduate. So the student usually has access to the school site because they go to school there. They bring the guns in. I remember in one case, the kid wrapped it up in blankets. It was in the backpack. Sister drove him to school and he had all the guns right there. And the other thing is that school shooters widely announce what they're going to do. That is also a hallmark of school shootings. They let every student on earth know, I'm about to do this. So there's several points where we can do something different. Teaching the kids the difference between reporting and tattling, because in all the situations, students didn't report because this stigma with tattling. So teaching them the difference between those two things is really important. These students that carried out shootings, they had a perceived feeling that their social standing was not great at school. This was not necessarily accurate. They weren't all loners or losers at school. A lot of them actually had good social standing, but in their own mind, they felt that they had been snubbed in some way. So teaching kids how to resolve conflict, de-escalate, the mental health support that we keep talking about, that actually also really does help. Someone mentioned up here having an adult connection, or you were talking about how important you're that one adult for a lot of kids. Having every kid should have at least one adult that gets them, that sees them. That makes the world of a difference. And then I think lastly, there's other barriers, the internal door locks and single controlled entry. Fencing, I would like to spend some time understanding. I don't think that alone is going to do it. But as a parent in the district, I would want to look into studies to see whether or not that helps.
We have pretty easy access campuses. Our campuses are easily accessed, and they should be assessed. Each one should be evaluated to preserve our student population.
Yeah, but in a lot of the studies that are done around school shootings, the emphasis on is maintaining a warm and positive school climate comes first. So I think we have to look at it through that lens too when we're thinking about barriers and see how it would impact the mental state of the students.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think it's hard because, Peninsula is a gated campus, or, if everything is locked and, everything is how it's supposed to be. But from the trainings and what we know about school shootings, if one is on, you want to get the heck off. So now I literally try to practice with one hand trying to do the lock so that I could open it fast and get kids out and tell them to just run like heck. So they're good, but it's also, you know, like if PV high, you would just run, right? Because they're open. So I don't think there's a solution, you know, because once they're in, they're in. But I think the one thing I hear is it's not gonna happen here. That is your biggest mistake. If you look at any of the active shooters, especially back when I used to Columbine, it was always in affluent neighborhoods just like this. So unfortunately, I know that I am going to be here for another 20 years. The odds of it happening once in my career is probably high. And that terrifies me for students and myself. But so what could we do? Everyone's like, oh, they're too busy to man the front or however it is. I just think there's, again, gray, think simple things like how expensive is a Ring doorbell? You know, like if your front person is there and you put a ring on at Penn, we have that one gate, even if that's closed and all they had to do was that, and you see them and, you know, because they're supposed to check in at the main office, but that is almost your choice if you check in or not at every school. It is your choice. It's advertised that way. It's you're supposed to do it, but there's not anybody going to make you do that. So I'm one that always wears my badge. When I see strange adults, I said, did you check in at the main office? Some of them are like, no, I work here.
But there should be district-wide best practices deployed throughout all the schools.
Correct. That's why I think it's definitely
yeah.
something that needs to be looked at. And there's also simple things I think we can do that don't cost a lot of money, and just getting more people invested, because it does happen in communities like ours. And also I think when school shootings happen within our country, an email from the superintendent to the parents is not enough. Sorry.
It goes along with that.
No one talks to the kids. No one is talking about it on the sites, and we get.
Let's call it what it is. It's an enormous public safety issue that's going to take a multi-pronged effort. And people seem to be unwilling to take even the baby steps. Somebody said something where I said, oh, well, background checks, it doesn't matter. Well, actually, when you hear that somebody got a gun legally, it does not necessarily mean that they purchased it and had a background check, because most of the sales now are going over the internet, and there is absolutely no background checks for the sales of guns on the internet. So all you have to do is go to armslist.com, and there's 40,000 weapons listed.
So we'll have gun day.
That's a really I just want Ami had
Sure. You know, the district is definitely looking at a multi-tiered approach to safety, and there's nothing that's not on the table. Everything is an option, and everything's being looked at. The one point that was brought up earlier, you know, the district's looking at fences, at increasing SROs, at adding cameras. But, you know, to the point that was brought up earlier, sometimes, you know, certain decisions could have an unintended consequence. So fences and things that make it harder, you know, that close in a campus could also make it harder for students to get out of the campus, right? So everything has to be looked at. But there's a lot of easy solutions, including extra cameras and extra supervision. And simply, you know, going back to something that's been around since we were all in school, see something, say something. The more our community is actively engaged in, you know, just being vigilant about what's going on campus, that includes the students, the parents that are visiting, the teachers. I think, you know, it's such a small thing, but it goes a long way.
And monitoring social media.
Absolutely.
Just like Sara said, you know, a lot of things are said.
Kids
way
are
ahead
really
of
good
time.
in high school. I don't find the title. I mean, so much our own students have saved their own students by either saying, I'm worried about this student, or I feel unsafe with what I saw. And obviously we don't go and say, this person told us, and we take it very seriously. And then we, you know, commend those students, because it's got to be hard. But, you know, we have a lot of kids that are, you know, they're more aware of it, and because the more we're open to talk about mental health, they can see the signs, and they're coming in a lot about threats.
Anyway, we're running out of time. I'm so glad we could cover as many subjects as we did today. I did want to add that the PVFA did pass a resolution on curtailing gun violence and mass shootings in American schools and public places. This was taken up this summer at the National Education Association in Chicago, where it was combined and absorbed by a similar resolution by the NEA and was approved. So that came from Tim Coleman, and also.
Hey, Ann.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? I think an important point was that the school board also supported the PVFA resolution on a 4-to-1 vote. However, the one vote came from against the resolution was from Matt Assault Weapon Brock, who stated that the only reason that he would not support the measure was because it included a ban on assault weapons. I think it's important that the public know that when they go to the voting booths this fall.
Oh my gosh.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Rick. Very, very good.
The Wizard of Oz. From behind the screen.
Very, very good point. I will also say that Tim, who couldn't be here, did announce that they endorsed Ami Gandhi, Sara, Deen, Ridgecrest, and Gene Christian for board.
Gene too, yes.
Okay. That's it for our program. We are going to go into announcement unless you guys have any short last minute item you would like to say.
Just thank you for having us and letting us talk like this, and because we're all here, again, at the end of the day, we want to keep it simple. It's about our children. And first, raising good human beings that are going to go do really good things for other human beings in our world before we get to all this other crazy stuff.
Yeah, I think I would add to that, and that just remedial returning phone calls. We can talk about really complicated things, but how about
the Google form?
And the Google form, right? So that you can go and link on and ask for help. I mean, things like that make all the difference. And so I love your theme for today. I think it's fantastic. But just getting a return phone call from community members, from parents, and from your own staff. I think those are great things to focus on. And if we could do that, anyway.
Just wanted to say thank you so much for this opportunity. And it is always about putting kids first.
Amen to that.
I'm just going to add 4 out of 5 seats are up for election in the school board. This is a high stakes election. This is the year to pull out all the stops. This is the year to put up a lawn sign. This is the year to make sure your candidate has the resources to purchase the mailers, to put out the materials. This is the year to call your friends and say, it's not a presidential election, but our future is on the line. This is the year to vote all the way down the ballot. So I'm just asking everyone, please get involved this year in our local school board race. And for Democrats that are not in this school district, get involved in yours. But thank you again so much for having us here today. And thank you for bringing your perspective.
It's a great platform.